film that the Disney studio wanted to make for a very long time, ever since Walt Disney played Peter Pan as a little kid, and then fell into the audience, apparently. I'm not sure if that's a true story or not, but it sounded funny. So the film came out in 1953, even though it was planned to be released in the early 40s. But that's how Disney works. Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, or Peter and Wendy, is a play/book that was written by a dude called J.M. Barrie. And, of course, the play is pretty famous. It's been one of the most adapted plays since its introduction in the early 1900s. It's pretty popular, and the most interesting thing about it is that the copyright is held by a children's hospital, because that's what J.M. Barrie sold it to before he died. He's like, here you go, have the rights to it. So it took a while for Disney to even get the rights from the hospital, basically. But yeah, it's been adapted multiple times, and even some of the stage play, traits, are still in the animated movie, which I think is pretty interesting. For example, the father character in the play is always the same guy who plays Captain Hook, and the same goes for the animated version, which I think is a pretty clever takeaway. Also, for the most part, the film follows pretty closely to the book. There's going to be a couple changes made, but a lot of them were scrapped because they didn't make much sense, so they pretty much kept very true to the book. One of the things they actually had to cut from the play that didn't work well in the movie is that the audience helps bring back Tinkerbell back to life by saying, I do believe in fairies. This was actually going to be in the original film, but that didn't seem to work very well in a theatrical film, so they cut it. Despite this being one of the most famous versions of the story, it's lacking one of the most crucial scenes, which was that scene where characters had to believe in fairies, but it's not really that great of a scene anyway, so who cares? There is a misconception about the character Tinkerbell that she was based off Marilyn Monroe, but from what I understand, it is not true, which is a weird theory. She is not based off Marilyn Monroe, so don't worry about that. Even though this character barely has any screen time, she ended up being the most popular character from the film. I guess it's the design, I don't know. She's got a fat ass. I'm not even joking about that. In this one scene, she's like, what? My hips are way too big. When is that a problem? I don't understand that. Women nowadays love having giant asses, but whatever. Back in the 50s, she couldn't have that. The character really started to reappear in these television programs to advertise the film, as well as the Disney Future Park that was coming out soon, where Walt Disney would interact with Tinkerbell, as well as she would advertise certain things. So that's when the character really became popular, because of these television stuff, really. So let's get into this film from the good to the bad. Unfortunately, the bad in this movie is really bad. If you somehow don't know about Peter Pan, I'll give you a brief summary of the story. Peter Pan is about a boy who never grows up. He has a backstory, but this film doesn't give it to it. It's in the play and in the original book, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. And he brings 3 kids along to Neverland, where they can never grow up, since one of them, being Wendy, it doesn't want to grow up. And they're like, hey, Neverland, you don't have to grow up, so come with me. And Neverland, of course, is filled with the fantastical creatures, from pirates and mermaids and racist caricatures. And the main moral is that even though being a kid is fun, sometimes you have to grow up some days, but you don't have to leave your childish ambitions behind. Not a bad message. Unfortunately, there's racism involved. Much like pretty much every film from the Silver Age, it is animated very beautifully, and is full of more human characters doing more fantastical stuff, meaning this is a lot more harder to animate than it might look. Much like in previous Disney films, for the humans, they use a lot of live-action references, most of which is played by their actual voice actors, like Wendy, Peter, and Captain Hook. All of those guys are the same voice actor as the live-action model. And yes, they did use a Mickey Mouse plush as a reference for the kid here, and that is hilarious. The same technique was used a lot in Alice in Wonderland. In fact, they hired the same girl who played Alice, Catherine Beaumont, to play Wendy, which makes a lot of sense. The actor who played Peter Pan was Bobby Driscoll, who was already familiar with Disney, first starring as a young child in Song of the South, and then going on to doing other films like Treasure Island. He unfortunately had a pretty tragic life that, of course, Disney happened to make fun of, which we'll get into right now, because I have to mention it. The story about Peter Pan is about a boy who doesn't grow up. Fortunately for the actor who played Peter Pan, he did grow up, and eventually lost his role. Going back to school, he was ridiculed for being in these films, because that's just something that happens that people do with child stars. So at a very young age of 17, he discovered drugs like heroin and became addicted to them ever since. Couldn't find work much of it because his addiction to drugs to cope with the fact that he was constantly bullied all the time for his role as Peter Pan, the fact that Disney didn't rehire him for anything else once he got old, and then he died laying on the street of a drug overdose. Isn't that nice? Poor kid. Well, he was 30 at the time, but he was pretty young. So what do you think Disney does in recent years to honor a person that helped produce some great roles? Peter Pan's an iconic film, and he did a great job playing the character. So what do you think modern day Disney does? What if we make a washed-up Peter Pan that's heavily based off his life here, where he's a drug-out, washed-up star in our terrible Chip and Dale movie that everyone didn't... I hated that movie. I couldn't even get through it. Terrible casting, ugly animation, and just very mean-spirited, very un-Disney-like, just like insulting an actor who's been dead for a very like over 50 years at this point. It was so insulting, and it's just, I mean, it was just so tasteless. And just looking at this just disgusts me. I cannot believe they even released this movie, and I'm glad that no one talks about it anymore. It's such an awful film. Let's go to one controversy to another. The Native Americans in the film, or as they call them, Injuns, which is not racist at all. They're not in the film for that long, but for what they are in there, it's nothing but offensive stereotypes, terrible caricatures, and a really bad offensive song. Honestly, just the idea that Native Americans are basically like a fictitious character that needs to be on an island is insulting. I talked about Dumbo and how that movie I don't think was actually racist, but this, I can't defend this. This is just plain out awful. Despite this, I think the rest of the film really holds up despite the fact there's a glaring issue. It's a fun movie, bursting with great animation and creativity. You can't help but not like it. That includes the king of pop, Michael Jackson, who made his own little music park in his old house called Neverland, based off the Disney version of Peter Pan. Obviously, you can tell from the facade that it also is very, very inspired by the Disneyland and Disney World entrance, but you know what I mean. 2002, they actually made a theatrical sequel that was kind of a direct-to-video, but not really, called Return to Neverland. It looks okay, I guess, but I don't really remember it. I guess I gotta rewatch it. Unfortunately, there was also a live-action remake that looked really dull and bland and ugly that I didn't see, and nor will I probably will, unless you guys force me to. It looks bad. In the 2010s, they make all these Tinkerbell movies, or kind of similar to those Barbie movies, or direct-to-video, stuff like that. I've only seen 2 of them. That they're all right, I guess. They're there. They don't have a lot to do with Peter Pan though, other than there's Tinkerbell. And then, yeah, that's about it. Remember last time I mentioned this weird Alice in Wonderland Figment crossover? There's also one of Peter Pan called Reading Magic, where a live action guy plays Peter Pan, and there's an animated version of Figment. It's incredibly weird. Let's just say that. 2002, there was a PlayStation and PC game called Peter Pan's Adventures in Neverland, where I guess it's a 2D platformer. Well, not really a platformer, because you can fly around everywhere. You play as Peter Pan and going on adventures, I guess. Though you want a more advanced game, at the same time, Peter Pan The Legend of Neverland had you playing as Peter Pan in the PlayStation 2 era. I guess, fighting little pirates and stuff like that. And of course, around the same time, there was another game on the Game Boy Advance. It looks like this. There was also a Disney Junior show called Jake and the Neverland Pirates about pirates working for Captain Hook, or maybe against him, because this is during the time people like pirates a lot, thanks to Pirates of the Caribbean. When it comes to Disney rides, there is no more well-known than Peter Pan's Flight at pretty much every Disney park in Disneyland, Walt Disney Studios, what to say it like that, Paris, Tokyo, and even Shanghai. This ride is known for having the longest wait time for some reason. I do not know why, but everyone wants to ride this ride. There is a new ride at Tokyo Disney Sea, where Peter Pan called Neverland something, all these names are the same thing, but yeah, that's what it looks like. Neat. In Disneyland, Paris, and Tokyo, there is a restaurant called Captain Hook's Galley, which is in a pirate ship. Cool. And that's all there is to say about this film. Let's get into the rankings. This is the current film ranking. Peter Pan's in the B tier. It was close to being an A, but I had to knock off points for the scene that I mentioned in my review. I'm not going to repeat it, but it was pretty bad. I decided to count just Captain Hook as the villain. Smee is just his right-hand man guy, and the Croc just wants to eat Captain Hook, so that's not really a villainous thing, unless you view it that way. Captain Hook's a pretty fun villain. He's excellently played and excellently animated, and he gets a lot of scenes. He's a fun character, and he tries to bomb Peter Pan, so he's a terrorist, so that's funny. Here we are at the song ranking. I'm at the bottom of F tier, because there is two F tier songs. Well, I mean, the Red Man Red, I don't explain anything else about it. F tier automatically bottom. I also have Following the Leader, a really annoying kid singing song that sucks and doesn't even sound good. So that's it. We're going up to E tier, only one song here with the Elegant Captain Hook. It just doesn't do a whole lot there. It's more like exposition than an actual song. In D tier, I think I have one song, or do I not have it? Your Mother and Mine. It's alright. Could be better. And A Pirate's Life's also there. And then in, let's see, what else is there? I had to look. In C tier, we've got You Can Fly and The Second Star to the Right. Yes, the intro song is the best song in the movie, at least according to me. I like the melody, alright? And that's it for the song ranking. Next time, I really hope you like spaghetti, because we are doing Lady and the Tramp, which of course happens to be a film starring dogs, which is great. See you then. Hey, did you know I have a book? In fact, I have multiple books. They're available on Amazon. There should be a link in the description. However, I do have the digital versions on my Patreon, so if you want to support me and read what I have written, they're mostly kids' books, but you might enjoy it. After all, we all like SpongeBob, or whatever your video you're watching. I might reuse this clip. Then you can make sure to check it out. And thank you.